Blender is best known as 3D modeling software, yet it also has a quite powerful video editor as well. So today I'm going to talk about the Blender Video Sequence Editor and how you can use it to create video content. In order to follow along, you'll need to install Blender, which you can do from the Blender website. So when I launch Blender, it's going to put me in the default 3D modeling view. This is a very powerful tool for creating 3D models, but it's not actually what we're interested in today. Now, in my mind, it's a little unfortunate, but the video editing feature is kind of hard to find in Blender. You want to go to the top of the page just under the title bar here and click on this little plus button, Add Workspace, and then Video Editing and Video Editing. Now this will load a screen that we can use to edit a video. So on the left side here, we have a media browser. We can browse for videos and images and audio that we will be able to drag and drop into our project. We have a preview window. It's black right now because there's no content, there's no scene, in fact, for us to render. We have the properties window on the right. This is where we'll change all of the parameters in Blender and also what we call strips, which are our video content, our photos, and our audio. And at the bottom of the screen here, we have the sequencer. This is where we'll actually drag and drop content to put on the timeline of our video. And in fact, in this sequencer, we want to click on this new button to create a scene. And you'll notice a few things have happened. First of all, in the sequencer, we now have a region that's highlighted here with a bar. That bar indicates our current position within our video. And this region is the length of our video. Also, in this preview window, we no longer have a plain black screen. We now have this checkerboard pattern. And the checkerboard pattern means that it is transparent. So there's nothing to render at present, and so nothing is being rendered. All right, now there are a few important considerations when working with Blender with video content. The first thing, actually, I'm going to open a file here. I have this little sample video content, which I'll drag and drop in here. The first thing we want to consider is the colors. So Blender is first and foremost a 3D modeling tool, and it has different views that represent the color space in which you can work. Now, by default, when you first launch Blender for the first time, yours may be set as AGX or as Filmic if it's an older version of Blender. And AGX and Filmic work great for 3D modeling applications, but they don't work great for video content in the sense that they don't represent colors from the input exactly in the output. So in this image that I have here in this preview window, you'll see that actually with this AGX view, the white bar looks a little muted. It's a gray color, not actually white. And similarly for Filmic, you'll see the same thing. So what you want to do is, if it's not already set as standard, set it as standard for your video editing work. That will give you the true representation of colors from your input to your output, as long as you're not working with 3D content, right? This is limited to working with the 2D video content like images and videos. All right, now there is another thing you'll want to do, which is to go to this Output tab in the Properties window. The first thing to mention in Output is that this is where you fix the resolution of your video. So by default, and what I currently have it set to, this is 1920 by 1080 video content. So you could change the resolution of your video by adjusting the numbers here. So for example, I just changed this to 1080 by 1080, and now my video would be square. So I'm going back to 1920 by 1080, and that is 1080p video. If you wanted to do 4K, you could do the dimensions of a 4K video here. Now, a very important thing to note is that Blender does not work very well with variable frame rate videos. So oftentimes if you're, say, recording the screen on your computer or taking a video on your cell phone, your device may be writing video that has a variable frame rate, in the sense that at some points in the video it might be capturing, say, 60 frames per second, but then at some other points in the video it may drop down to even as low as 20 or lower. And that works well enough in programs like Final Cut Pro and other video editing software, but Blender really expects constant frame rate input. And this is something you'll want to decide in advance and with intention. So if you have video content of a given frame rate, you'll want to match that in Blender, or you'll want to pick something and stick with it and make sure your input videos are all constant frame rate with an appropriate frame rate. So for example, I often do 30 frames per second. You could also do 60 or any of these numbers really, as long as it's consistent, especially with your input video. Now you want to pick this in advance, because if you look down at this sequencer down here, you'll notice that we have 8 seconds and change of video content. That is that shaded region, that highlighted region of the sequencer here. And that is because our video is defined as 250 frames, currently at 30 frames per second. So 8 seconds, 30 frames per second. If you multiply those together, that would be 240 frames. However, if I go in and change this to something lower, like maybe 8, you'll notice that now my video is about 30 seconds long. And so we have just increased the length of this video with the same length of image strip in our sequencer. And so you want to, wherever possible, avoid changing the frame rate after you've already set up your project. So pick one and stick with it if possible. Now the next thing to talk about is the output format. So this is under this output section under the output tab in the properties editor here. You can set a path for your output. So I'm going to just choose this directory that I've created for this project, sample Blender video. You can optionally specify a file name. It'll use a default if you don't, so I'm just going to choose this path, but not a file name. And now we can choose what we want to export. So by default, this will say image, meaning that it is going to save images of the frames in your video in this PNG format. Now, if you're creating video content, you probably want to change this from image to video. And we're not done yet. So now that we've changed this to video, we'll want to look under this encoding subsection of output and choose some parameters here for our video content. So you may want to, for example, create an MP4 file with the MPEG-4 container. I find that H.264 works well as a video codec. I personally like to change the output quality to perceptually lossless or lossless. And by default, the audio codec is set as no audio, which means your video output will have no audio. So if you have a voiceover or music in the background or something, you will want to change this, likely to something like AAC, FLAC for high quality audio, or MP3. So I'll just choose AAC for now. If you have audio files with specific parameters, such as the sample rate or the bit rate, you could set those here to make sure that your output is consistent with that as well. All right, so that is how I would set up a project. And in fact, I do this so frequently in Blender when setting up a video project, changing all of these parameters like the color space, the frame rate, the output directory, the container, so all of these parameters that I've just changed here, that what I personally like to do is save this file. So I'll do save as, and maybe I'll call this template.blend, and I would use this for all of my video projects. And then what I would do here is actually save as again, so I'm not overwriting my template when I actually work on the video content. And maybe I'll call this sample video.blend. All right, so now whenever I save, it's going to save over sample video.blend, but I'll still have that template.blend with all of my changes to the parameters, but none of the video content. All right, so you saw me drag and drop this image into this sequencer earlier. That's effectively how you work with content in Blender when you're working on a video. You could optionally choose this add button here in the sequencer as well, and then add movie, sound, or image or sequence of images, that does effectively the same thing as dragging and dropping from this media browser. So you can drag and drop images. They're shown in this purple color. You can drag and drop video content, and you can drag and drop audio. Video content will be shown with a blue background and audio will be shown with a green background. So you notice that when I dropped in this video, it dropped in 2 strips into the sequencer. One of them is the video strip and one of them is the audio strip. And when I click on one of these, it selects both. That's the orange or the white highlight around them. And if I drag one of them, it moves both of them as well. So these are linked together and they are synchronized. So the audio is going to stay synchronized with the video here. Now, if I wanted to edit these separately, I could do so by right-clicking and then clicking on Disconnect Strips. And so let me actually undo that. I want to make a comment here that there is a little link icon on the left side of this video. And when I disconnect the strips, now they are separate. And so when I select or move one, it doesn't affect the other. So for example, if you have some stock footage that comes with audio, you could disconnect the strips if you didn't want that audio track, and then delete it by pressing X when it's selected. Okay, so let me drag and drop in some other content here. So here's another example where this video that I've added is video from NASA. I'm using NASA video because videos published by NASA are generally not subject to copyright in the United States. So this video here is a video of the Earth from the International Space Station, just some views of the Earth. And then it also has this quotation at the beginning from Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot. So in the event that I wanted to, for instance, use this in a video without the audio overlay, without the audio content behind it, maybe just the images of the Earth, I could unlink these, disconnect the strips, and then delete the audio track. All right, so what else can we do with these strips in the video sequence editor? Well, there are a few buttons on the left over here. There's the blade tool, and there is the slip tool. So the blade tool, you can use the keyboard shortcut K as well to use this tool. And what this does is it takes the current strip that you have selected and splits it where your current time is, where your time cursor in effect is. So I pressed the K key while I had this selected, and it split it into 2 strips that I can now move separately. Now there's also this tool called slip, and you can use this by pressing the S key on your keyboard as well. And what slip allows you to do is move the video content within a strip without changing its length. So in this instance, I'm moving my mouse to the left, and it's basically pushing all of the content at the beginning of the video off of this strip so that if I push it far enough, eventually it's not going to start with that quotation anymore, that Carl Sagan quotation, Pale Blue Dot. So that's useful, for example, if you want to crop something out of a video, some content that you want to remove in time, essentially. All right. Now the next thing to know about the video sequence editor is that it is rendering content from the higher channels, so channels with a larger number, on top of content with a smaller number. So in this instance, I have this sample_text.png image, and that persists for quite a while actually. Like, this is a pretty long strip, it's almost the full length of the video. But as soon as I have content above this, so on a channel that's above this, that content will be shown above this content. Now you can change how this is displayed by going into the Properties window and choosing Strip. So this is going to allow me to edit the properties of this strip that I have selected. So in this case, I'm editing NASA Apollo 11.mov. So its blend mode is currently set to alpha over, which means it's going to be drawn over the content below it. I could change the blend mode to change how the colors are displayed, for example. And I could also change the opacity here to change the strength of this. So for example, when I had this as alpha over, the default, it would cover all of the content, but I could lower the opacity so that you can see something behind it. All right. Now there are a whole bunch of other properties that you can change in this properties window for this strip. So for example, you can change the position of an image or video. So you can see if I move this off the screen, you can see the image below it. Or I could rotate this image. I could also mirror it across the X or Y axes and make adjustments to things like the timing of this strip. Now, each of these properties in Blender can be changed in time. And the way you do that is by creating a keyframe. So this is what makes Blender a powerful video editor. For example, if I wanted to take this sample text image, and maybe I'll put this on top, if I wanted this to fly into the video and like change transparency with time, for example, I could choose a property in this strip properties window here and right click it, and there is this option insert keyframe, and this has now changed to yellow. The background is highlighted as yellow. Now I can move along in this timeline here, and you'll notice that it has changed to green. It now has a green background. This means that there are keyframes, but that I'm not currently on a keyframe. So I could add a new keyframe here, for example. What I've done is I've said the position X is 0 pixels for this image strip at frame 19. The current frame is shown at the bottom of the screen here. So I'm at frame 19 and I'm saying the position X is 0 pixels. And then at frame 34, the position X is 0 pixels. Now that's not all that interesting, so let's actually go ahead and change this. I'm going to jump back to this previous keyframe by using the arrow keys on my computer. So arrow key up goes to the previous, arrow key down goes to the next. And let's say that I want this to start maybe off the screen. So we'll just call that good. I can right click this again. It's now orange to say that I've changed this value. And if I click on replace keyframe, I've now told Blender that at frame 19, I want the position of this image to be negative 1696 pixels. And in between those, Blender is going to interpolate. So it has a sort of smooth interpolation by default, but you can change that if you want, say, linear interpolation. All right, now you can do the same thing with other properties. So maybe I want it to start out pretty small, like maybe 1/10 of its original size. I can add keyframes for that. So now I've said the scale X and the scale Y are both 0.1 at frame 19. And then at frame 34, maybe I want them to be 1 and 1. So I've inserted keyframes for those as well. And now when I play back my video content, you'll see that this flies into the screen. So our image is changing position and size in time. And you can do the same thing with properties like opacity. So that's the powerful features of keyframes in Blender. All right, so there are also some things that you can do to change these strips that are not shown in this properties window. They are what we call effect strips. So if I go to this add button here on the sequencer and then add an effect strip, you'll notice that I can add things like speed control. Speed of video is a little clunky in Blender in my opinion. If you want to change how quickly a video strip plays back, you'll need to use this speed control effect strip, and it's not super intuitive. But there are plenty of tutorials on how to do that online. And there is also something called Gaussian blur, which will allow you to blur an image or a video, for example. So let's say I increase the blur magnitude on this. You will see now that my image is blurred. And this, just like any other strip in Blender, has properties that you can animate. So for example, if I wanted the size, which refers to the size of the blur, to change in time, maybe I could insert a keyframe for each of these. And then let's advance forward in time a little bit. And then maybe I want this to become unblurred with time. So I'm inserting keyframes for that as well. And Blender will interpolate that just as it did with the position and the size. So if we play this back again, now our image flies into the screen and then goes from blurry to sharp. Now this Gaussian blur applies to this sample underscore text.png strip. And in fact, it effectively replaces it in Blender. So for example, if I were to change a property like opacity of this sample underscore text, it won't really have an effect on the rendered output at this stage. So I just changed its opacity to 0, in fact, and it's still showing on the screen. So if I wanted to change a property like that, I would actually go into this Gaussian blur effect strip, and then I could do something like slide the opacity up or down. So that is a way you can add to content like images or videos, especially if you want to do something like add a blur effect. So what I like to do to create videos is edit some image content in, say, Inkscape or a comparable program, and then I save it in a format that Blender can load. So for example, I have the export tab open on Inkscape. That's outside of the scope of this video, but suffice to say I'm exporting a PNG image that is 1920 by 1080, so it's consistent with my video. And then I am loading that PNG image into Blender. So that's a way that I like to work with content. You could also add, for example, text right in Blender. So you could specify the text and the font and the size, positioning, of course, for this text as well. And there are other primitives like color that you can add, which is, as it says on the tin, color that fills the frame of your video. So in this case, we have just a black color strip, so it's just showing black in the video right now. But I could also change this to a different color if I wanted, and maybe use that as a backdrop for my text, for example. So there are plenty of ways you can interact with Blender and different strips and effects that you can add to work on your video content. Now, when you actually want to render a video, the way you do so is by going up to the top of Blender, right under the title bar at the top left, clicking on Render, and then Render Animation. And that's going to use those video or output settings that we described earlier to create output for us. So in this case, it's going through and rendering our content. Now, that actually finished rendering quite quickly, and that's because it's only going to render the content in that highlighted region of the sequencer. So if I had a longer video, I could go to the bottom of the screen and click on this end frame and then slide this. And you'll notice in the sequencer, we are now increasing the area that is within our video. So we're starting at frame 1 and now we're ending at frame 2000 or so. And I could keep going with this to get all of the video content that I want to include in this. And so I'll go ahead and render this again. And this rendering is actually a separate window that opens up in Blender. And you can follow along with the progress in the window in the background. So now I have this blue bar that's moving to show where it's rendering right now, as well as a progress bar at the bottom of the screen. So this is currently rendering my video, and I specified the output but not the file name here. So you'll see that it's actually writing to this 0001 to 3529.mp4. Those numbers refer to the start frame, so start frame 1, and end frame, so end frame 3529. And this isn't done writing yet. This video is currently in memory, but it'll be written once Blender's done rendering it. So this 0001 to 250 .mp4 is the video I rendered earlier back when my timeline in the sequencer was much shorter. Alright, so we just finished rendering this video here, so we could go ahead and open this with any video browsing software that we have and go ahead and see our final project here, our final result. So now this would be ready to upload to YouTube, for instance. Alright, so before I conclude here, there is one final thing that I want to mention about the frame rate of the video. So I said it's very important to have video that is at a consistent frame rate as input. Blender doesn't work very well with variable frame rate inputs. So I've in the past done a screen capture that had some sensitive information on it, and I added that content to Blender naively without adjusting the frame rate. And then I did all of my editing work to hide all of the sensitive information with like blurs and things that covered up parts of the screen, for example. And it looked perfect in the Blender video sequence editor, but then when I actually rendered the video, all of the timing was off, and parts would be blurred when they didn't need to be blurred, and parts would not be blurred when they needed to be. So that was a little bit of a disaster, and that's entirely because the source video was captured with a variable frame rate, and Blender doesn't support that very well. So if you do have video content that you'd like to include in your video project in Blender, I would strongly recommend making sure that everything is at a constant and consistent frame rate first. So there's software that can help you do this. For example, FFmpeg, which is free and open source, will allow you to specify a video as input, and then optionally specify things like the video and audio codecs, and then say that you want your output at a specific frame rate, and that will then make a constant frame rate video that Blender plays nicely with. So you won't have the same problem as me where all of your video timing is off in your end result. So it's a bit of a limitation with Blender, a bit unfortunate in my opinion that it doesn't support variable frame rate video very well, but that is an important consideration. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions about this, please let me know.